This is episode 70 of the Why Not Me podcast, the Fawn Response. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And in this podcast, we talk about how to overcome our internal obstacles to endure this life well. Okay, you guys, I have this habits group coaching program, so to speak. In fact, if you want to join it, you can join. I will drop the link in the show notes. It's really low cost. It's $40 for 3 months. And the goal is to use the idea of minimum baselines from Elder Dunn's talk, not this last general conference, but the conference before. That would have been fall of 2021, right? Time is like a warp zone for me. I don't even know what year it is. So the idea is that we work on one, maybe two habits at a time, depending on where you are, and we make incremental progress. And it's super fun. And we coach over in Voxer. It's a free app that you can text or voice memo. You can drop pictures and videos and things like that in there. So I have a small group in there. Go to the link in the show notes if you're interested in that. And we do coaching calls as well over Zoom. And recently I had a coaching call that I just thought was so powerful that I wanted to share with you kind of what happened on the call. And I'm sharing with permission from my client. I'm not going to share any names or pertinent details, but the principles, the concepts will be really powerful, I think. And it's about the fawn response. We are in our culture, at least from my perspective, I'm sure this is not true for everyone, but we're pretty familiar with the fight, flight, and freeze responses. This is, when something happens and you feel like you need to fight, you feel like you need to run away, or you just shut down and freeze, right? Those were sort of the original 3 trauma responses that were published, decades ago. And as time has gone on, we have learned about other responses. And the fawn response is one that has come a little bit later. So not as many people know about it. And, I think they wanted to keep that F theme going, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But the fawn response is when we're feeling afraid or threatened and we try to appease, right? We try to over love or appease. And I think the reason why oftentimes this response is not as talked about is because it is so socially acceptable, right? We want to love our people. We want to take care of them. We want to meet their needs and support them. And so it could look like all of those things, right? Taking care of, loving, meeting needs, supporting. But the fawn response is those kinds of actions in response to an inside feeling of unsafety or danger. So I have a free PDF. I will drop the link in the show notes as well about trauma responses, or another way to think of it is just nervous system responses that are socially acceptable. And they're so socially acceptable that we don't recognize that they're actually nervous system or trauma responses. We just feel like this is the truth for me. This feels so true. Or I can't stop getting myself to do this kind of thing, because your nervous system is coming online to protect you. And so the protection from any danger or perceived danger or pattern of previously perceived danger, right? This is why it gets so complicated, brings up this response. And then you might have a situation where you have felt like I literally couldn't talk, or I couldn't move, or that kind of thing. That's a nervous system response. So we're going to talk about the fawn response today. I was coaching a client and she asked me to coach her about her son, her grown adult son, who I think is 30 or so years old. And she said, he calls me every day and I don't want to answer the phone and I don't want to talk to him. So I kind of probed a little bit more. And really, what was happening is every time she heard the ringer, and she has different ringers for each of her kids and different people in her life that are calling, anytime she heard the ringer for this particular son, she felt like she was in danger. Okay. She felt like she just had to like get away, danger, like dread, all of that kind of thing. And so that's when I started going, I think maybe this could be a nervous system response because of the whole, how she said, like, it felt really dangerous. She felt afraid. She felt scared. I think that was her word. I think she said, I feel scared when I hear the ring. And so then I started asking a little bit more, like, how does the conversation usually go? How do you wish it would go? That kind of thing. And what really was happening is because of her fear, she was trying to appease him. So she told me that he calls, he asks for advice, and then he either doesn't do the advice that she gives or he tries it and it doesn't work. And so he blames her. So then a lot of these calls is him blaming her, saying, like, you did this, this wasn't right, blah, 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 blaming her. And I think this is such a common thing, right? She didn't come to the call saying, like, oh, I'm having a trauma response or my nervous system is on high alert. She's just like, how do I stop answering the phone? Or how do I get my son to stop calling me every day? Right? This is how we describe it. And then, of course, she feels on top of that some guilt or shame because she's like, I'm his mother. I shouldn't want to not have him call. Right? And so we really had to gently peel back some layers of what was going on and helping her see that her body is perceiving his phone calls as danger. And when that happens, we have to take care of ourselves first. We have to really ignore and put down the part of the conversation about what is my duty to my son, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So one thing that I told her before I realized that this could be kind of a trauma response, but I think it applies even if it is a trauma response, is that when we notice a dynamic in a relationship that keeps happening over and over again, we have to step back and think about, how am I teaching this person how to treat me, right? How am I allowing it or somehow accepting their treatment of me that makes them think that this is okay, right? Because we teach people how to treat us. Now, son doesn't know that mom is in a nervous system response, and that's not his responsibility at all. But when we start thinking about, well, what am I doing to kind of continue this pattern or this process, this dance, so to speak, that happens between us in our relationship. Because when you stop dancing and there are two partners in the dance, the other person has to stop dancing too. And yes, it's very uncomfortable. It's very awkward, right? But that's the truth of it, is it's a dynamic, it's a back and forth. And when one person stops or opts out, then the other person has to as well. So the first thing is that I kind of look at, what if we as individuals, as the person in the fawn response, what if we look at what has happened along the years, the days, whatever, that I have taught this person that it's okay to treat me this way. Even though I feel scared, what am I doing that sends them the signal that this is okay? And I think when it comes to a fawn response, this is where it gets really tricky, right? Because when we start fawning, when we start kind of people pleasing and appeasing, we start appeasing their needs, it makes the other person think that, oh, me saying this or doing that is okay. Because then mom comes back and she gives me extra love and attention, and she's extra patient, really, right? But they don't know what's happening inside of us. They just see the outside, the external actions, and they're like, oh yeah, this is okay. She's, allowing me to do this. So the very first thing is awareness, which is always the first thing I'm going to tell you every time. But it's kind of a twofold awareness. Awareness of what's happening, kind of seeing the dynamic play out, but also awareness of what your options are. Because when we are in a nervous system response, we think we don't have any options, right? So this mom was saying, well, I either have to ignore the call or I have to answer it and just deal with him blaming me and asking for my advice, even though I know every time I give him advice, he's probably not going to take it, right? Those are my only two options. So a nervous system response like this is going to feel very binary, very black and white, either or. Either I run away, right? Which is a different nervous system response. That's the flee response, right? I hear the phone ringing. I know it's my one son, and I want to ignore it. I want to get away from it. That's the flee response. So both times, like before her actual response, she's feeling danger. She's feeling a sense of unsafety. And then she's like, I only have so many options. Either I can appease him and get him off the phone as soon as possible, or I can ignore the call. But there are a myriad of options in between that we just don't even see when we're in that nervous system response, that trauma response. So awareness of what is the dynamic that's happening and what are my options before we even decide to change how we're showing up or to have conversations or any of that, we need to gain some awareness. Now, you can do this on your own. You can journal out, like, here's what happens, here's what I do, here's what they do, back and forth, and then look at it objectively. What's going on here? But I will say that I think it's so much easier to gain that awareness of the dynamic of the relationship when you bring in an outside party who is objective and doesn't care or loves both people equally, right? The second thing I will say that you can do before you decide to change the dynamic at all is start imagining yourself showing up a different way. Start visualizing yourself in the moment when the phone is not ringing, so to speak, right? Because for you, it might be a different situation. It might not be a phone call. It might be when my husband says these certain words, or it could be just like when I wake up, right? That I have this response. It could be when the baby's crying, right? When a baby is crying, we probably want to have a fawn response. This is nurturing, the baby can't take it care. That's not a good example, but all I'm saying is there could be lots of different triggers. It doesn't have to be this son is calling kind of trigger. So think about it for you in your life. Where do you try to appease people? Where do you try to make sure that they don't feel a certain way? Where do you try to like people please kind of thing? Any of that dynamic you could examine. And before you change anything in the real life situations, just visualize yourself or imagine yourself being a little bit different with it. And you might have to do this for days or weeks before you decide to actually act on that. But we know that all things are created spiritually before they are created physically. So you're going to have some form of imagination or visualization to create it, to plan it in your mind before you change the dynamic of the relationship. Okay, so that's another thing you can do is just visualize it differently. So in this example, I would recommend that my client visualize the phone ringing in the ringtone that is this son calling, and visualize yourself just being so easygoing and like, oh, I'm so happy to hear from him, and answering the phone in the way you want to show up to that relationship. Okay, number 3 of things that we can do is we can set some boundaries. Now, I feel like boundaries in the world of self-help, self-development, therapy and coaching, it's a very loaded word. Let's put it that way. There are times to set boundaries, and there are times when we think we should set boundaries when really we shouldn't yet. So I always teach that we set boundaries after we've done all of our work, all of our inner work, because setting a boundary is like trying to change the situation from the outside. You can absolutely do it, and it can be very, very effective. In fact, all of us set boundaries in our lives subconsciously. We don't make it like a formal thing, but we have boundaries in our lives. We don't always have to sit down with somebody and say, okay, if you call me and you start blaming me, then I'm going to hang up, right? That would be one potential boundary that this client could create. I recommend waiting to set boundaries until you get some coaching or therapy or something, some kind of inner work on your own, because the boundary might not be needed once you do that work on your own. But if you are in a trauma response, a nervous system response, it might be a support to you to set a boundary, maybe earlier than you normally would. Because the most important thing here to make progress is for you to feel safe. Safety is always number one with trauma. Now, you could set a boundary with the intention of like, I don't have to tell anyone about this boundary. I don't have to let other people know at all. It's just a boundary for my own self to know, like, it's okay for me to not answer the phone. So if my son calls, I won't answer it. That could be a boundary. If my son calls, I won't answer it for the next 2 weeks. Something like that. You could make it time constrained. Now, it gets a little tricky here because there's a lot of like, what do you really want? Do you want your son to keep calling? Do you want your relationship to change? So you might not want a boundary where you totally cut off communication with your son, right? So there are a lot of different layers to consider, which again is why I recommend working with a practitioner. The fourth thing that I would recommend is to allow the relationship dynamic to continue the way it is, but before or during any interaction, you ground yourself in a felt sense of safety. So it might be that for this client, before the phone rings, she grounds herself. She takes some deep breaths. She feels her feet in her shoes or on the floor. She looks around the room and finds something that is pleasant to look at. And then once you have that thing in your eyesight, you drop into your body and like, this feels pleasant to look at. How does it feel in my body? Like, what does my body say is pleasant? This is what my coach has taught me is called orienting. We just orient to our physical space because when you are threatened, you have laser focus. You have like the what's it called? The blinders on. Blinders, that's what it's called. You have blinders on because you have to focus all of your attention and energy at the threat. So your neck is going to be really stiff. Your head is going to be in one position. You're going to have like kind of a freeze. I think of this like the little bunny rabbits that we have around here. When I go for a walk, sometimes I can see a rabbit up ahead in the path and they don't notice me yet. And they're just hanging out, chewing on whatever. And then they notice me and I can see that they freeze and they look straight at me. And then they make a determination of which way to go, right? So the closer I get, then they start hopping away, right? And so I think of that like when something comes into your sight and it feels like a danger, all of your attention goes right there, right? So you don't have the ability to look around and be like, oh, la di da, I'm safe, it's good. So by doing this orienting, we send a signal to our bodies that we are safe. So this client could practice this process of grounding and orienting and then feeling into her body. I'm safe right now. How do I know? Where do I feel that safety in my body? And then when the phone rings, she can practice that, right? So with one part of our attention, we are feeling into our body and feeling that place where we feel safety. And with the other part of our attention, we're listening to Sun on the phone, right? And we're reviewing our options. My option could be I answer the phone and I listen. And I say, yeah, I don't really think I have any options for you. What do you think? Right? This is something that a third party, a coach or a therapist or a friend even, could help you brainstorm. Like, what are the other options that I'm not seeing here? But that felt sense of safety, while we also have a felt sense of unsafety, can help us open up, expand our capacity to deal with the threat, right? And you do that 10, 20, 100 times, and your brain and your body are going to be like, oh, it actually isn't unsafe for my son to call, right? Your body is going to be like, oh, we did it. We got through that and we weren't threatened and we still are safe, right? So it's almost like you have to feel in your body where that safety is. And you have to start gathering evidence that I am okay. I am safe right now. Nothing has gone wrong. My son is just talking to me on the phone. He's saying words. He's making vibrations into the air, into my ears. And then those vibrations I am hearing as words, right? Like if you can do this, like split attention during the threat, you will expand your body's ability to handle the threat. And if you keep doing that, then your body will be like, oh, this is no longer a threat, right? The awareness piece is really necessary because when you don't realize you are in a threat response, then your body just takes over and is like, oh, we got to get away. We have to do this. We have to appease. We have to run away. We have to fight, right? And it never gets to feel that sense of like, oh, we're actually safe. We're safe now. And actually, this is one of the things that happens is that we have the response, the fawn response in this case, where we're appeasing, taking care of the other person's emotions kind of thing. But then when the threat goes away, when we hang up the phone with Sun, we don't actually give ourselves an opportunity to feel safe, like, ooh, that's over, right? Because we get, as humans, and as humans in this American culture, especially, we get in our heads about it and we start picking apart the conversation. I should have said that. And I should have done that. Oh, I shouldn't have even answered the phone. That was terrible of me. Why did I do that? Right. So we don't stay in our bodies after the response, after we feel unsafe, after we feel the danger. We don't allow our bodies to kind of come down from that stress, right? The stress like goes into our bodies to like make us focused and like, okay, you can fend off this danger, but we don't allow ourselves to just be like, okay, we're okay now. That was heavy. That was a lot or whatever, but now we're okay. We just go into the next thing in our lives that gives us a nervous system response. Like we walk into the kitchen and then we're like, oh my gosh, look at all the dishes. I have to take care of all these dishes. Right? This is why I feel so passionate about doing this work with trauma and our emotional responses and getting in our bodies and getting out of our heads. It's because I think this is my theory. I haven't fully tested it yet, but I think for some of us that grew up with what I would call developmental or complex trauma, where we're sort of always on edge, that almost everything becomes a trigger for our nervous system. If you have a hard time, what I would call playing or enjoying yourself or relaxing, that's a sign that you're in this sort of perpetual state of activation, and almost everything is triggering a nervous system response for you. And I have experienced what it's like to come out of that, to be in that for 40 years and to come out of it and to allow myself to relax and allow myself to enjoy and allow myself to be in just life that isn't unsafe. Right. I spent so much time in the trauma responses, in the activation, that it felt really foreign and weird and awkward to me to not be in that type of feeling. But I had to, and I'm not done yet, right? I probably will never be done, but I had to train myself to learn that relaxing and enjoying is safe. Because as a kid, it wasn't safe for me. My family life was so chaotic and I never knew what to expect that I always had to be on edge. So it was very protective of me then. But now I don't need to always be on edge, but my body says we need to always be on edge. And I've had to train my body through somatic practices. This is what I'm talking about, getting in your body, describing how you feel, really being with that and seeing that, oh, it's okay. I can be here. Sending the messages that it's okay, it's safe, all of that. It's so much easier to do this work with someone else because when you're doing it for yourself, you kind of have to have one part of your attention examining what's going on and then the other part of your attention in your body, right? And it takes less energy and effort to have someone else walk you through that. It doesn't have to be me. Of course, I would love and be honored to help you with these kinds of issues, but I just urge you to go get help somewhere. Go find a therapist, go find a coach, someone who can hold space for you, who can reflect back to you what's happening, because you are robbing yourself of joy and fulfillment and love by being in these perpetual states of activation and feeling like you have to take care of everybody else's needs except your own, and like reenacting these patterns over and over and over again because your body is trying to find the thing that will help you feel safe again, right? So that's enough for now, and so are you. If this episode made you think differently, would you please give it a review and tell me your favorite takeaway or share it with a friend? And if you want more, go to danitabremmer.com. I have a free PDF. You can connect with me through my contact form, or you can sign up for a totally free coaching session. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.